Father Leo John Dehon arrived in Chicago at the end of August 1910. Taking advantage of his decision to attend the International Eucharistic Congress in Montreal beginning September 6th, he came early to visit the United States, and after the Congress, to complete a trip around the world, visiting several Asian countries. He arrived by steamship in New York City on August 19th, and in just under 2 weeks, he stopped in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta. He toured Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute in Alabama and traveled to New Orleans and St. Louis. After his short stay in Chicago, he proceeded to Detroit, Niagara Falls, and Toronto on his way to Montreal. After the Eucharistic Congress, he visited Quebec City and headed west to Alberta to visit with several missionaries that he had recently sent to minister to French-speaking Catholics in Western Canada. He continued on to Calgary and Vancouver and went south to Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Tijuana, Mexico. Retracing his steps to San Francisco, he departed on October 6th by steamship toward Asia, where he would visit the Philippines, Indonesia, and India. He wanted to visit Vietnam, but he said he could not afford the extra time. This 7-month trip around the world certainly included sightseeing and tourist attractions. But his underlying reason for such a far-flung venture was to assess the needs of the church and where and how the members of the Priests of the Sacred Heart could contribute to the establishment or flourishing of the church in areas still considered mission territory. In North America, the French province already sent missionaries to Western Canada. Father Dehon would check out the possibilities for the German province to begin ministry in Dubuque, Iowa. While in New Orleans, he expressed his wish that the Italian members of the congregation would soon be able to follow Mother Cabrini's sisters working among Italian immigrants. In a letter that he sent to a fellow SEJ shortly after leaving Chicago, Father Dehon wrote, "What beautiful ministries I have seen. All religious orders prosper over here, and they take on the American spirit of vitality. We should have an American province later on." From the Philippines, he wrote, "I am going about from mission to mission, and everywhere I am greatly edified. The missionaries are very generous and devoted. We too could bring a great deal of joy to our Lord and to the church if we had more missionaries in the Congo, Canada, etc. Look for more vocations and have our students pray earnestly for that." He added, "The Philippines need priests." From Indonesia, he wrote, "I wanted to see Java, where our Dutch confreres will find a place later on." In India, he noted, there are 50,000 catechumens waiting for catechists and baptism. The possible work in Dubuque never materialized. And by 1940, the mission work in Western Canada among French-speaking Catholics came to an end. You are aware, however, that the SCJs began ministering in the United States to Native Americans in South Dakota. Soon after, they were working with the Mexican and Black populations in the industrial town of East Chicago, Indiana, and then began to minister in the mostly rural and poor counties of northern Mississippi. Their seasonal ministry to migrant workers in Indiana eventually led to ministry along the border in South Texas. The SCJs have been in Indonesia now for many years, but relatively recently began ministry in the Philippines, India, and Vietnam. Back to Father Dehon and his short stay in Chicago. In his diary, he writes, "I paid a visit to Dr. Kelly, the affable director of the Catholic Church Extension Society. It's a new apostolate filled with promise. It was founded in 1905. Dr. Kelly combines the qualities of a perfect gentleman with the zeal of an apostle. This society has its counterparts in Europe, the Francis de Sales Society in France, and the St. Boniface Society in Germany, whose goal is to spread the faith within their own lands. Naturally, in America, it is run the American way. Its headquarters is located in one of the finest buildings in Chicago, overlooking a park. Inside its offices, you will find all the modern means of communication: telephones, stenographers, typewriters. Remember, this is 1910. It is truly the center of the American apostolate." He continues, "The purpose of the society is to build churches and schools for the Catholic immigrants who are flocking to the United States at the rate of 600,000 or 700,000 per year. A quarterly journal, Extension, informs its readers of its needs. Its current resources are about $6,000 a month. The society has its own Pullman car, which serves as a chapel on wheels, and it goes all throughout the country, bringing missionaries to carry out their work. American railroad companies transport the car free of charge. I had the pleasure of riding in it from Chicago to Detroit." Father Dehon was wide-eyed as he kept noticing the American spirit of vitality and how things ran in the American way. He did not use these words, but I think he was talking about how, for the most part, Americans dream big, maximize their creativity, work efficiently, and accomplish great things. Of course, for Father Dehon, there were only two great things in which he was interested. In a letter to all the members of the Priests of the Sacred Heart, he wrote, "Among the general works of the apostolate, I attempted two great undertakings. The first was to lead both priests and laity to the heart of Jesus, that they might offer him a daily expression of adoration and love. I have continued this work through our apostolate of reparation for the laity, through our magazine, which worked to spread the reign of the Sacred Heart, and through my books on the Sacred Heart. This apostolate needs to be continued, expanded, and intensified. I also wanted to better the conditions of the common people through the establishment of justice and Christian charity. I have spent a great part of my social writings on behalf of this cause. Pope Leo XIII was kind enough to consider me one of the faithful interpreters of his social encyclicals. But the work must continue in this area too. People are not yet convinced that the Church possesses real and practical solutions to all the social problems. It was not lost on Father Dehon that all this activity costs money. This is why he was particularly captivated by the Catholic Church Extension Society. Father Dehon came from a relatively wealthy family and had the use of a hefty inheritance. While a young priest, he created St. Joseph Youth Center using his own funds to buy property and a building that needed renovations and expansion. He began the Priests of the Sacred Heart by founding a boys' junior high school, which of course required property, buildings, renovations, and furnishings. His bishop entrusted to him and the congregation the pastoral ministry of an entire neighborhood in the overcrowded factory town of Saint-Quentin. Father Dehon took on the responsibility of purchasing land and building St. Martin Church. In addition to all of the expenses incurred in establishing local communities and houses in France, Holland, Belgium, and Italy, in the education of seminarians, and in the material support of missionaries in Ecuador, Congo, and Canada, Father Dehon took on one more huge project: building a church in a new neighborhood in Rome dedicated to Christ the King. For Father Dehon, this was a crowning effort to establish symbolically the reign of the Sacred Heart of Jesus throughout the Christian world. Raising funds for this project would consume the last years of his life. Father Dehon's diary reveals, "Our project in Rome is somewhat fright-inspiring. We need $1 million in 1921 and $500,000 in 1922 to construct merely the living quarters and the foundations of the church. And my collection produces so little. At Rome, our work goes on, but we are borrowing from the bank. We are living in a time that is little favorable for soliciting funds. All of Europe suffers from the economic crisis. We are preparing a great subscription list for the church. We are writing to the whole episcopacy in 7 languages: Italian, French, English, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin. I had 4,000 letters printed and sent to France and Belgium requesting funds for the benefit of the society in Rome. Pope Pius XI questioned me about the Church of the Sacred Heart. He inquired about the collections the proceedings, and the publicity. I showed him our plans and the list of bishops who had approved of a collection or who had ordered one. The General Council of the congregation has requested that each priest offer 2 masses each month for the benefit of the International Church. In practice, each priest of the congregation should give 10 francs each month. Of course, a growing network of benefactors and the inheritance of other SCJs contributed to the financial support of the congregation and its ministries. It is estimated, however, that Father Dehon invested approximately 800,000 francs of his own to the works of the congregation. Today, that would be the equivalent of nearly $3.5 million. He invested everything he had to promote his 2 great undertakings. Father Dehon died 2 years after the first mission began in the United States. But the twofold goal of promoting the reign of the Sacred Heart and bettering the conditions of common people through the establishment of justice and Christian charity remained constant. So did the struggle with finances. Father Foreman began his mission work in 1923 on the Lower Brule Indian Reservation in South Dakota. A high school seminary began in St. Marie in 1926. St. Joseph's Indian School opened its doors in the fall of 1927. A novitiate program was established in Hales Corners in 1929. At the time, these ministries of the United States were part of the German province, which in the wake of World War I made the German province almost bankrupt. Out of necessity, it levied a $1,000 tax on these American houses. You could say that finances were tight. But then came the Great Depression, which began with the stock market crash of 1929 and continued on until about 1939. Right in the middle of this financial crisis, the FCJs built a high school seminary in Donaldson, Indiana in 1935. This is the backstory of the present-day development office, initially staffed by 4 SCJ brothers. It was not conceived solely as a male campaign. Brother Martin Kelly actually spent time in his native Philadelphia to beg money from the poor and working class Irish. Brother Martin and Brother Fidelis made frequent trips to visit with donors. In 1929, the SCJs started a bi-monthly magazine entitled The Mission Call, with the intention of making our society and her purposes known and to gain friends and benefactors. The first issue had a press run of 500 copies, but by the end of the year, there was a press run of 4,000 copies. The magazine ran regular articles on St. Joseph Indian School, the missions, and the seminaries, along with requests for mass stipends, an advertisement for life bonds, and an invitation to fund a student burse, which would support and educate a seminarian. The most successful campaign was the Sacred Heart Mass League, which guaranteed that all who were enrolled, living and deceased, would share in a special Holy Mass offered for them daily in perpetuity. But this was the time of building and expansion of the Catholic Church in the United States in general. And many bishops and diocesan clergy were not happy that religious orders were taking away donations from local projects, complaining that all mission societies are nothing but a bunch of beggars. At the time, the Archbishop of Baltimore warned Catholics of his diocese not to listen to what he called religious racketeers clothed in the garb of religious. The monastery house diary notes, "The bishops of this country have lost sight of the needs of the foreign missions and such mission seminaries that educate priests and brothers for the missions. Still, we are going on as usual, sending out campaign letters and trusting in divine providence. We are in God's hands." These founding members of the United States province did what they could and trusted in divine providence. This is what I call proceeding in the Dehonian way. There are surely many reasons why campaigns are not as successful in our day, and donations are not as plentiful as they once were. It's important, however, to remember that this development office, of which you are the heirs, struggled mightily in the beginning. If Father Dehon was able to visit you today, I'm sure he would again be amazed at the way you proceed in the American way. But he would also want you to remember that we are in God's hands. Father Dehon's spirit is alive in you when you do your very best and place your complete trust in divine providence. That is, in essence, the commitment that every SEJ makes when he prays a daily act of oblation. Whatever your particular task in this office, you are an essential part of the present ministries of the priests of the Sacred Heart. On Father Dehon's birthday and in Father Dehon's name, I thank you.